When I first fought Balteus, Armored Core 6 wasn't released yet and there were no guides to save me. I died a lot. But I eventually busted down this gatekeeper and went on to enjoy the best Armored Core game ever made, put that on the box. Then the game came out, and a bunch of guide videos started popping up on YouTube for how to beat Balteus. But what was kind of weird to me is that each guide seemed to recommend a different Armored Core. Why is that? This video is not a guide, but I hope to answer that question, and in the process explain why Armored Core 6's Balteus is so good at killing you. In the mission Attack the Watchpoint, Balteus is not the only enemy. You have to fight a bunch of laser sniper cannons and some empty fodder, and then take on the AC Sula. He's kind of like a gatekeeper's gatekeeper, because if you're having a hard time with Sula, you're probably not ready for Balteus. Sula is unrelenting with his plasma missile salvos. His dumb bubble gun is shockingly deadly, and he loves to kick. Which is all useful information for your upcoming fight with Balteus, who loves to Atano Circus you to death, has a weakness to bubble guns, and is a great big target for kicks. The fight with Balteus takes place in a wide open circular arena. You can't hide from missiles here. Fast, sprightly mechs can easily rule the skies, and it's relatively free of the sorts of obstacles that would inhibit a tank build from boost drifting around. The arena is not a limitation on what sort of build you can make, which is another hint. The soundscape is, well, one of the best music tracks in the whole game, so you're gonna be hyped. But critically, it's free of any trash talk from Balteus. Unlike Sula, who can't shut up and is constantly trying to get you to question your allegiance with Walter. Why would I question my allegiance to Walter? Why? Instead, you have a friendly and supportive co-driver in the form of Air, who gives you a big heads up when Balteus is about to fire a stupid amount of missiles or go all Super Saiyan on you. If you listen closely, it's usually enough time to get away from Balteus' wrath.
Get clear.
And now it's finally time to take a look at Balteus itself, so pay attention.
Got a briefing for you, 621. Target is Balteus, autonomous PCA with a shock and awe ordnance config. Sports an RCL rifle, autocannons, napalm, shotguns, and a prototype missile swarm halo that'll put so many homers on your HUD, you'll think you're in Matt Groening's storage unit. Actually, you remember that episode of The Simpsons, 621?
Sorry, that episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets to design his own car and it's just completely bloated with all these bells and whistles. Balteus is like that, but built for violence. Balteus' damage output is a real threat, but his strategy hinges on overwhelming your senses and forcing you to make mistakes. If you're trying to learn his game plan and win at the same time, you're doing too much. But if we cast off our weapons and enter observation mode, we can start to see through his smoke and mirrors and bullets and napalm and bazookas and lasers and chainsaws. As opposed to a lot of From bosses who are some variant of big guy with sword, or huge dog with sword, Balteus doesn't immediately telegraph his capabilities. When I run into Malekith, I instinctively know I need to stay away from his jaws and blade. But this is kind of alien, until we take a closer look. Let's break down Balteus' kit. The transforming halo that surrounds Balteus' humanoid core is the most obvious and intimidating weapon in his toolkit. It fires homing rockets in several different patterns. In every case, the trick is to figure out how to dance around the pursuing missiles without running headlong into another swarm. But the firing patterns create different challenges. The inverted T is essentially a three-fingered claw of rockets that approaches you from both flanks and overhead. The tricky thing is that it fires in 2 salvos, which can make timing dodges tougher. With the hemisphere launch, the rocket pods form a complete dome over Balteus and fire in all directions. They fire in a single salvo, but their distribution means that instead of a concentrated swarm, they'll approach you in a long stream. Balteus' X-axis attack fires in a radial pattern, and his Y-axis attack fires in a vertical column. Either of these 2 attacks can combo directly into a full hemisphere launch. This rocket halo is the centerpiece of Balteus' overwhelming offense, and it's a whole lot to take in. Even so, it follows a few rules that can help you keep track of things. Balteus can swap firing configurations between salvos, but won't fire more than 2 salvos in a row before reloading his rocket racks. Also, any launch pattern is projected ahead of time. You'll see the rocket pods slide out of his big old backpack before any salvo. Balteus' right arm packs a triple stack of miniguns, but they're not as scary as they look. Sometimes he'll use them to chase you down after a rocket salvo, but they fire in short bursts and are pretty easy to skate around. The left arm is equipped with a couple of heavy shotguns that also look scary, but aren't much of a threat unless you're sitting still right in front of him, which is not recommended. The shoulder-mounted bazooka is Balteus' go-to punisher for players who stick to the ground too hard. Balteus is going for splash damage when he fires this, so you'll notice him thrust up into the air and fire downwards. And because Balteus didn't have enough rockets, he's got another set of front-facing rocket pods over his shoulders. He'll pop off a quick salvo to cover his movement, but they don't home as well as the Halo Swarm. In Phase 2, Balteus does all this stuff and more. His most noticeable new tool is a pair of flamethrowers mounted to the Halo. They can attack in single sweeps, double sweeps, or pair into one mega flamethrower that coats the ground with napalm. He also fights dirty. He'll charge in with a stream of minigun fire from his right arm, then quickly pivot to reveal the hidden stream of napalm he was cooking up on his left flank. It's pocket sand and a switchblade. This is another shock and awe tactic, but like his rocket Halo, there are governing rules that make it more manageable. Balteus has to choose between having the flamethrowers or the rocket pods mounted on his Halo. So, if you're dodging flames, you don't need to worry about horizontal rocket swarms. And that is Balteus. He's going to be overwhelming no matter what, but once you know his bloated anatomy,
too much fucking shit on me,
understand the form and function of his individual parts, you can start to read patterns in the apparent chaos, and find your chance to hit back. Now, let's get to work, 621.
Understanding Balteus' patterns and armaments is really only half the battle. You may know what Balteus is bringing to the table, but what about you? How do you figure out your build? Let's take a look at those AC builds from the Balteus guides I mentioned at the beginning. They're all doing their own thing, but they only use parts available to the player on their first run, and none of them use an expansion slot. First up, I tried the build recommended by YouTube channel Kibbles. This is a heavy-duty biped with a pulse gun in each hand and dual shoulder-mounted laser cannons. Overall, this build was an easy win. The bubble guns shredded through Balteus' shield, and the laser cannons were exactly what I needed to deal a serious punch to its health once the shield was down. They even provided a solid amount of impact damage, allowing me to stagger Balteus and get in some really good kicks. 5 out of 5 would recommend. Next, power picks. This burly tank build uses the same shoulder-mounted laser cannons, but swaps out the pulse guns for dual SMGs. It was also another easy win for me. The loss of mobility with the tank treads is more than made up for by its resilient armor, and I could throw my weight around in the form of tank kicks. I could still dodge missile salvos, but I could also shrug off big hits without much trouble, and repair kits to spare. While the SMGs didn't shred through the shield as quickly as the bubble guns, they got the job done. More importantly, they kept Balteus staggered with impact damage. 2 thumbs way up. Next up, GG Recon. This light and mobile reverse-jointed build uses a single pulse gun along with a pulse blade as its hand weapons, and vertical plasma missile launchers on its shoulders. I gave it multiple tries with this nimble AC, but I just couldn't seal the deal, though I got closer by swapping out the generator and the FCS. But it was still too fragile and easily staggered, and I never got the hang of the timing with the vertical launch plasma missiles. This left me without enough offensive power to exploit Balteus' short stagger windows, and even kicking was less effective. I did enjoy using the laser sword again, as I usually use melee weapons in boss fights. It deals a ton of damage quickly, helps you close the distance with enemies, and is pretty good against the pulse shield to boot. But no win for me. Finally, RevTech. This straightforward biped uses a plasma rifle, pulse blade, and 2 forward-facing 4-salvo missile launchers. In many ways, this AC felt like my go-to build, and I was very comfortable with it, even though it took me a couple tries to defeat Balteus. The plasma rifle was useful for weakening the pulse shield and dealing a solid amount of damage during the stagger window. I also found the forward-facing missiles much more useful, since they could be unloaded at close range. And thanks to the AC's mobility, I was able to stay alive much longer than I expected on my second attempt. And some clutch laser sword attacks and tactical kicks brought me the dub. Not all of these builds work for me, but clearly they work for someone. And that's what Balteus is trying to teach you, how to build your AC the right way, for you. In AC6, your mech has 11 different parts, but the critical slots, and the ones you should be thinking about first, are the 4 you get for weapons. These 4 slots need to pack enough punch to complete the entire mission, and Balteus, more than any other boss, makes it stupidly obvious what you need to do that. First, it's got a big glowing pulse shield that prevents all damage until it pops. So you need something in your arsenal to do just that. Second, when the shield pops, Balteus becomes staggered. It's both vulnerable and incapable of moving for a short time, so you need some weapons that deal a bunch of damage quickly. But you also need to be ready to fire now, and if you blew your wad just to pop the shield, you'll waste this valuable opportunity reloading instead. Finally, once Balteus gets moving, it's just as dangerous and agile as before, but its pulse shield won't recharge for a short time. This is another opportunity for you to stagger the bastard, so you need a weapon designed to exploit this moment. This is where the game is nudging you to look a little closer at the stats for each part. Yeah, I'm gonna ask you to open up the big spreadsheet, the full screen one.
No!
If Sulo wasn't a big enough hint, here you'll discover that the pulse gun is really good at destroying pulse shields, or that the pulse blade also does a solid amount of pulse shield damage. You might also notice how these shoulder-mounted laser cannons have a great direct damage modifier. This hugely beneficial stat shows how much extra damage a weapon deals to an enemy that's been staggered. Perhaps you'll discover that most kinetic weapons, like SMGs, have a very high impact stat, which means they're good at staggering enemies. The rest of your build will naturally flow from your arsenal. Maybe something on tank treads that can carry a bunch of heavy weapons, or something fast on its feet that can deliver close range attacks. This lesson is simplified by the fact that part selection is limited early on, which makes it even easier to find the best ways to counter Balteus. You'll notice a lot of guides recommending these shoulder-mounted laser cannons, and while they are very effective, they're also the only large shoulder-mounted guns in the freaking store. The point isn't that all these little nudges are going to push you down the one true path of success, but rather you need to go down on these little paths so you can find what works for you.
Got another Simpsons reference for you, 621. Remember the time Homer put the sea captain's buffet out of business? He just had to try everything. That's what you need to do, 621.
What I mean is you need to play the menu. When you get stuck in a Souls game, you retreat to the equip menu to adjust your build. Maybe you equip a weapon that'll give you an elemental advantage. Maybe you swap out some rings and amulets. Either way, these are just adjustments to the build that you're already running, and it only takes a few seconds. In Armored Core, the time you spend in the garage menu is as important as the time you spend in sortie. Some fights are won in the garage. When I learned the value of playing the menu in AC6, I got a lot better and started having a lot more fun. It's a fox-hen grain problem where the raft moves at 300 miles per hour. The push and pull of core building is a satisfying puzzle of cascading choices and clever adjustments. The laser cannons I wanted to bring overtax my generator, so let's swap in a new one. But now we're over weight capacity. Do we want to beef up our legs and run a slower build, or find somewhere else to prune? If you have to completely take yourself apart and rebuild for a mission, it doesn't mean your old build was wrong. It just means it wasn't right for this challenge.
Armored Core 6 is a game about constantly rebuilding yourself. Each mission might need a radically different approach and therefore a radically different AC. Understanding how to build for those challenges is what Balteus teaches you, between all the moments he's killing you. What at first might seem like an overwhelming, unstoppable force is really just a chance to look inside yourself and find the shoulder-mounted laser cannons that were there all along.
"621. I've been thinking about the superficial similarities between Family Guy and The Simpsons. Breaking it down, the obvious differences would be Baby Stewie and Brian. They add a sort of sardonic wit to the proceedings that isn't really there in The Simpsons household.